So we're here with Jeff Menges, known for Swords and Plowshares, known for Kjeldoran Outpost, Bazaar of Baghdad. Really, some of your cards I've been playing since the game started. You know, I started in 95, but your art's been with me since I've been like 15 years old. So it's a real blast to have you on.
Well, thanks a lot, Zach. Good to be here.
Yeah. So I wanted to talk about, I want to talk about your career overall, but tell me about what you were doing before you got involved with Magic the Gathering.
Well, I mean, before card games, the premier fantasy gaming venue was the variety of high-level role-playing products that dominated the industry in the late 70s and early 80s. So Dungeons and Dragons was the kind of the hands-down leader, but there were all kinds of others biting at their heels all the time. There was Chaosium was a big player back then. Iron Crown Enterprises had the license to do Middle Earth role-playing products. I did some work with them. West End Games.
Star Wars IP, of course, yeah.
Yeah, they did Star Wars. I did a tiny bit of work on Star Wars product back then. And they had a game called Torg, which was like a house product that I did a lot of work on. And I did a ton of work for Ars Magica role playing.
Okay.
Which lasted for a good 25 years, and they're just about to have a rebirth. So
many of the artists from your era were working on Ars Magica.
Yeah, they were easy to work with, and while they didn't pay great, they paid. They were reliable and honest, and you knew what you were getting into when you signed up. There's a lot of companies that would promise you more and then stumble one place or another, and you wound up getting shafted about it. But Ars Magica was always on the up and up. Good people there.
So how did you get onboarded to Magic?
Well, unlike today, with all the traveling and visuals that you can do on the interwebs.
Yeah, pre-internet.
You had to get out there back in the. You had to go show people stuff because they weren't going to find you. There was no way to do that. You had to send them postcards and write the occasional letter or note. And the best thing to do was to get on the ground and go to conventions where companies were going to be. So that meant a road trip to Gen Con. And that was like one of the very first things I did when I got out of art school. That was 1987. And I did a couple of things that year. I mean, when I attended Gen Con in 87, I was purely a patron of the convention. I didn't have a slot in the art show. I didn't have any kind of a status in the business. So I was just out there with a portfolio under my arm, prints of my work, photographs of my work, really. Because digital printing didn't even exist back then. So you had a portfolio and you went and you tried to talk to people, and that's what I did. I got work then from Iron Crown Enterprises, gave me a module pretty shortly after the convention to work on. It was common practice that when you worked on a module, either you did the cover, which was only for artists of some repute, or they gave you interior work. You had to do black and white work in the 80s. There was no getting around it. Printing color was ridiculously expensive by comparison, so all the game companies printed black and white work.
Yeah, you get like a spread inside of a game book that had color, and that was kind of it.
If you were lucky.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, but there was usually 20 to 24 black and white line pieces in any given module, whether it was for TSR or Iron Crown or Chaosium. They all did that kind of stuff, so you had to know how to be an inker.
This episode of Eternal Durdles is sponsored by Cardmill, the first automated scanner and sorter built specifically for trading card game players. With its intentionally compact design, Cardmill uses AI-powered recognition to identify each card and sync inventory with real-time pricing, batching up to 300 cards at a time by name, set, color, or type. Collection data is securely stored in the Cardmill network, giving players full access to their cards through an easy-to-use web portal. Cardmill supports Magic the Gathering, Pokemon, Yu-Gi-Oh!, Flesh and Blood, Disney Lorcana, Star Wars Unlimited, and many more to come. Created by software engineer and longtime Magic the Gathering player Jonathan Dumanis, Cardmill launches on July 22nd on Kickstarter. With early bird pricing starting at $350, backers receive lifetime access to all software updates and new features. Go to cardmill.com to learn more and reserve your path to the future of card sorting.
So I got work on some of my inking samples with Iron Crown, and I had a piece in my portfolio from my senior year in art school that the art director at Dragon Magazine bought right out of my portfolio and used like 3 months
Amazing.
later as a 2-page spread color in Dragon Magazine in the November issue. So that was huge.
Yeah. Oh, Dragon was like, that was the place to be, man. That's the GQ of fantasy at that point in time.
It absolutely was. It was where everybody wanted to see their work, was in Dragon. So it wasn't like the sea opened up in front of me and I just ran in. But it was a nice introduction to get a piece in Dragon and to get a module from Iron Crown. That was a really good start, and it gave me work to do during the winter. Yeah, I was off with some hope in it, and I was trying to get work in paperback book covers. That was where I
hear
really
that's where
wanted
the
to
real
be.
money is.
Well,
Or was at the time, right?
It was then, and it was definitely what I wanted to be doing. But that area of publishing was definitely waning. I had to show my portfolio a lot then, and what I kept hearing was, well, come back to us when you have a book cover. And how can you get book cover work if nobody wants to give you book cover work until you have one? But gaming was the answer to that question, because the gaming market was always looking for a better artist, and they weren't going to pay a comparable rate to standard publishing, but you could get work published. So I just kept kind of thumping down the gaming door. A few years later, I was getting magazine covers, and I was getting the covers of some of those products instead of just the interiors. I'd started doing a big bunch of covers with the Ars Magica folks that I mentioned earlier.
Did you ever get that book cover? The like paperback book cover?
I did get some paperback
Nice.
book covers. Yeah, I did. I did a bunch of like classics. I did like Robert Louis Stevenson and Edgar Allan Poe and that kind of stuff. So that was, yeah, it was really good. I still got a few of those hanging around. So I was kind of in that phase in 1992, and I was doing some interior art for Wizards of the Coast at that time. I think I was probably working with them since probably 91. They were producing accessories for role-playing products. They didn't have their own role-playing line, but they produced all kinds of stuff that you could use in, if you played this role-playing game, or if you played that role-playing game. Like, here's a bunch of gods you can add, here's a bunch of towns you can add, that kind of thing. Generic role-playing product that could go with a lot of different stuff. So I was doing black and white work for them, largely due to Lisa Stevens' invitation. Lisa was a early frontrunner star at Wizards of the Coast, and I had worked with her when I was working on Ars Magica. She went later on to White Wolf Games and brought Ars Magica with her. And when White Wolf owned Ars Magica, I worked on a ton of product there. And then Lisa went to work for this little company in Seattle and took me with her.
She was, I think she was in the Igniting the Spark documentary, right? She was,
yeah, in a big way.
Yeah, because she was the only person with game experience at the
That's
beginning,
correct.
right? Yeah.
Peter says as much in the video. So I was working on product line for Lisa and for Wizards of the Coast at that time, and I think there was some talk about the card game, but it was really just, it wasn't something that they were ready to roll out. And I guess it was the summer of '92 at Gen Con. Jesper was on board as the art director. They had already started the play testing sessions at Wizards, and as Igniting the Spark alludes to, they knew they had some lightning going on. So they were starting to corral art, and Jesper was the guy that was in charge of all of that. So he took out me and Mark Poole and another artist to lunch to explain the whole concept of what they were doing, what they needed, and what they were able to pay. So to elaborate on the story a bit, I guess so that was the summer of 92, and I was paying at that time $750 a month to rent half a house. So I took enough Magic pieces so I could pay my rent for 1 month. So that was why
Prudent move, I think. Yeah.
I got 15 alpha cards because that was $750, and so that was a check from them, and we also got $750 in stock in the company. But honestly, nobody knew if that was going to be worth the paper it was printed on at that time. That was such a crazy idea, but it was still $750. It would still pay my rent for a month. And the other real upside to it was that, so as I mentioned before, I had started to do magazine covers and role-playing covers, and I would go to small East Coast conventions because I was New Jersey based back then. And I had a growing fan base, but very few of those people could afford to buy a large painting, or much less want a full-size large painting on a wall of a skeleton breaking out of the ground, or a dragon standing on a knight or whatever. So I had this growing cabinet full of artworks, but they weren't really going anywhere. I would either have to sell them for a tenth of what they were worth, or just sit on them for a while.
Finding the right high-end cards for legacy, vintage, pre-modern, or old-school Magic can be challenging. That's where a friend's 3-for-1 trading come in.
3-for-1 Trading is buying all Magic the Gathering singles and entire collections, big and small. They're one of the top trading card game traders, buying way over 1 million Magic cards a year, and they are more than happy to make you an offer on your cards. In addition to sending in your cards, you'll also have the chance to sell and trade them at MagicCon Atlanta, taking place from September 26th to 28th. Huge thanks to 3-for-1 Trading for supporting the Legacy community. Now back to the show.
So Magic comes along. They pitch me this idea that they've got all these pieces of color art that need to be done, and I'm always looking for a chance to do more color work. But the idea that they were going to be little tiny paintings, all the alpha paintings, as you probably are aware, were about 6 by 8 inches roughly.
Yeah, super small.
And that was literally because they only had an 8.5 by 11 inch scanner.
Man.
And they came up with the size ratio, whatever it was, and they said this is how big the art has to be so that it's going to fit on our scanner. So,
and back then, that was like one scan was like all the memory on a computer too. Like as a former photographer, like every time you did a high level scan, like that was like most of what your computer had as far as memory was concerned.
I am sure that they had to move a lot of art to SideQuest discs or zip discs.
Zip discs, yeah.
Something like that. That was popular at the time as a way of carrying memory. There's a lot of people that will be listening to this or watching it that will have no idea what those are, but it's comparable to like an 8-track in music.
Yeah, it's like if a memory card was the size of a cassette tape.
Yeah, exactly.
For those of you who know what a cassette tape is,
So we had a player that lived next to our computer that took those discs and carried a bunch of information. So yeah, they probably had to use a lot of those kind of things. But anyway.
But that's wild. I had never heard that that was the size of the scanner. So that's how the art had to be that size.
Yeah.
Because every now and again you're at a show or something and you see the art and you're like, damn, I always just thought it was going to be huge, like some giant piece. But yeah, they're like, that big,
Yeah. I've got a couple behind me. This is the sketch for Sea Serpent.
Yeah, there you go.
Okay, and so that is how big the actual piece was going to be. And then here's the actual piece.
That is the actual piece for Sea Serpent. That's amazing.
Yeah, that's the original.
Wow, that's so cool. But yeah, not very big.
Right, not very big. But so the idea was that there was going to be 15 little tiny paintings. And I knew that I had customers that could afford a little tiny painting that would want one. So I was like, okay, that's a nice idea. Like, I'll be able to do a bunch of color samples. I'll be able to actually sell them because they're little. Even if the game flops, they'll still be, nice little paintings.
You might make a couple $1,000s off your little tiny paintings, right?
Maybe a couple hundred.
Yeah. Okay. Fair. Yeah. Maybe a couple $100. Wow.
Yeah. Yeah. The first alpha paintings that I sold. So you you couldn't scan them at home because in 1992,
No.
nobody had scanners
No,
at
no one
home in
had them.
92. So you had a big stack of boards that you had all these paintings on, and you had to put them in a FedEx box to send them to Seattle. So that was, everybody used FedEx back then. It was a much different delivery service than it is now. They were great back then. Overnight, no problem.
It is wild to think. I used to work in the photo industry.
Okay.
So in New York, the fashion industry and stuff, so you'd have to send out your portfolios to places. I represented photographers. So
Okay.
you'd have this giant of either rip-outs from magazines or their actual photos, and we would have couriers bike around New York City with these backpacks on for them. Like that was only in 2007. If you think about like how long it's been that like just sending a normal size file to somebody is not a big deal anymore. Like you do that on Facebook, you're just like, here's a file, but like you couldn't even send something that big to WotC to like have them print it. That's crazy.
Nope. So they got a big stack of boards, and they said, there's a couple of people here who would like to buy some of these originals from you. What do you want for them? And the first couple that I sold to Wizards of the Coast employees were $75 a piece.
Wow. Someone's got like a Swords to Plowshare somewhere and is like sitting on a fortune.
Well, that one came back to me.
Okay.
But I sold Consecrate Land that way.
Yeah. Grizzly Bears? You still got Grizzly Bears?
No, I don't. And that is a long, complicated, sad story.
Oh, no. Black Knight?
Well, you've probably heard tale that early on there was a gallery affiliated with Wizards of the Coast that a lot of artists used to have the opportunity to sell some originals through. So I gave that gallery, which was called like Wizards Gallery, although it was not affiliated with Wizards,
no relation.
But they partnered. Right. But it was called Wizards Gallery, and so I consigned 4 pieces with that gallery, and one of those was Black Knight. So I got maybe a little more for it than I got if I was selling it myself, but the gallery got a chunk of it as well, and I don't know where it went. I've since had a tiny bit of contact about that piece. So there is a chance that I might still be able to track it down for a scan opportunity. Yeah, the Grizzly Bears painting is MIA right now. So if anybody out there comes across it, I would love to know more about who's got it and what we could do with it. But a lot of them, I'd say the majority of my alpha paintings, I do know where. There's a couple that are with friends. I gave some paintings to my family when I realized that these were going to be some, like this was the start of something. And I saw that really early on because I was a comics collector. And I thought, like, I immediately compared Magic to Action Comics and Superman. Like, this is a first. And even if there's going to be better stuff down the line, nothing's going to replace the first.
Exactly.
It's still going to be the first. So I saved all of my sketches, and I saved every little trivial piece of paper. That's why I was able to talk to some of the folks in the Igniting the Spark documentary, because I said to them, look, I've got everything from back then. Like, it's still in my filing cabinets.
Amazing.
So, but yeah, I had some interesting stuff to talk about that not everybody did anymore. Yeah, so I don't know. And so when Magic took off like a rocket, it took the artists with it. So for that was a couple of years in the mid-90s, it was pretty crazy times.
Yeah, you guys were rock stars for a moment, right? Yeah, that's what Wackwitch was selling.
Yeah, it was pretty crazy for a little while. Getting royalties was a crazy big plus, and it's often referred to when people talk about Magic art and the fact that we got royalties for those first bunch of sets. They call that the golden age as far as Magic art is concerned. And yeah, I guess that was probably from Alpha to, well, I know that we got royalties in Alliances too. It had to be my whole run from Alpha to Alliances, but in Alliances it was capped. That was a first. They put a limit on how much money we were going to get off each piece.
For me, the first time I can even think about knowing any of that side was when the first, like, whenever Llanowar Elf got reprinted, but not as the Anson Maddox painting, I was like, what happened?
Right.
That was kind of the first, and that might have been like 5th edition or 6th edition. So at that point, things had changed.
In 5th, there were a lot of replacements. They kept a small amount of my paintings, less than half, I think, in 5th edition, but replaced a bunch of them. Grizzly Bears got the first replacement there. And
because they had to pay you guys for every one of those, right? Every time something got reprinted, there was a
so reprint. In like those foreign edition sets, and in when they did Chronicles, they had to pay us. Like when they reused our art, they had to pay us again. So yeah, the money was good.
Sweet deal,
then.
Yeah.
But it was growing incrementally, and when the company expanded and they started to sit down and really feel how much money was going out the door, they were like, well, we can definitely keep some of this in house. Like we don't need to be spending this kind of money on the artists. And so they reined that in again. And then the Mirage set, they started flat fee based payments, and the whole thing kind of just really slowed down after that. It was still probably the best gig in fantasy artwork. You're starting to get like paperback book guys that were in the industry for 20 years are starting to pay attention, like, hey, what's going on over here? I'm seeing you at art show after art show, and like, you're creating quite a buzz. And they started to get interested, and Wizards was able to lure them over if they wanted to take the time to talk to some of those guys.
I'm guessing that was like guys like Brom and Donato, right?
Well, I mean, when Donato started was I don't know his history greatly, but I was at his first Gen Con, and so I remember when he came in and was just like, hey, do you think I could get some work from these guys? And I'm like, yeah, I think you're gonna put me out of business. He was good right from the get-go, and he's a fantastic human being. He's only done good for the industry. He's a really great guy. But he immediately was a top-tier artist right from the get-go. Now, Brom had been working for TSR for forever. He was
a lot
huge
of Dark
with
Sun
them.
work, yeah.
That was his line, man. He owned that look. But yeah, I guess later on he did dip his toe into the Magic pool. And yeah, there were a couple of guys that kind of bounced back and forth between the two.
Eternal Durdles is proud to be sponsored by Moxfield. Moxfield is the best Magic the Gathering deck building website on the internet. You can create, share, and find decks from Commander to Legacy, and even fan-supported formats like Pre-Modern and Old School. You can see all of our decks on our Moxfield. Follow the links below to stay tuned.
But like I said, my big role-playing career was probably linked to Ars Magica more than any other product, and that wasn't one that was going to put a lockdown on me and keep me from doing work elsewhere. I love Ars Magica as a product. It's really ingrained in my thinking. It's an historical background, but that has monsters and magic in it as well. So it has I can paint real castles and real armor, and nobody tells me no, it has to be more fantasy than that, So it allows me to do some research on things and get into that aspect of my interest. And Sorcery, as a newer card game, appeals to a lot of that as well. They like a lot of the stuff that I was doing for Ars Magica, and it appealed to them, especially for a set like Arthurian Legends comes out. So they're looking at, they want English-looking castles, and they want all that kind of stuff that has to do with a real place and a real time. My work was just in the right place at the right time for that product.
Yeah, it's also I said this to Brian as well, as it's also just great to see you guys out in the world, in a game I play again. The names I grew up with, and then being like, oh, I bought this new game and I'm like, oh, everything's really hand painted, and I go through and I'm like, I haven't seen art from this guy for forever, I'm not an art collector, as it were, and I play Magic, and
right.
And then I see you, I see Wackwitz, I see Benson, and I'm like, oh my god, this is awesome, this game rules,
Nice.
And so it was super cool to see the all those old heroes that I used to be like, oh, there's I know this name at the bottom of the Magic card,
Yeah. Well, Eric's Curioso, who produces Sorcery, they had a lot of that same fandom feeling. They had grown up playing early Magic cards, and they loved a lot of that look and feel, and they wanted to try and capture that same sense. So they went with a lot of the same artists that they could get involved in a new card project. And I mean, I'm a freelancer to the core. So if a company calls me and asks me to get involved and the idea sounds solid, I'm usually willing to step up to bat. A new card game comes along, you're a little cautious. I mean,
Yeah. We lived
as
through the 90s.
yes, as much as being through Magic and some of the solid card games that followed it, there were 10 times as many, as you were alluding to,
Yeah.
that were not solid. And the games that followed Magic were every gaming company wanted to get a piece of that pie because Magic so dominated the gaming market in the mid-90s.
Every
That
IP had
everybody,
a game.
yeah, everyone. And the first people that they wanted to get on board were Magic artists because they had cachet. They had, like these people have already been accepted doing art in this venue, so they'll just do it for us now. Everybody that was involved early on got calls to work on all kinds of games.
What are some of the other games that you worked on during that era?
Well, I worked on a bunch of games for Alderac Entertainment Group. I worked on L5R. I worked on Warlord Saga of the Storm.
Nice.
I worked on Doomtown, and I worked on 7C. So like,
okay,
they're kind of their four major properties at that time.
No Dune.
No,
cards?
I did
No?
not work
Okay.
on Dune.
Fair.
I worked on Mythos for Chaosium,
Oh, yeah.
which was a lot of fun, and I loved the period and the Lovecraft flavor. I worked on the Edge for Atlas.
Edge.
Yeah, worked on
Yeah.
that. Worked on Shadow Fist. I worked on the original release of Jihad, which later became Vampire: The Eternal Struggle.
Yep.
And then there were a couple that were trying really hard, like Dragonstorm was a game that Susan Van Camp came out with later on.
Yeah.
It wasn't really a CCG. It was like a role-playing aid, but you needed a bunch of card work. And yeah, Susan and her husband Mark put that game together. Worked on that for a while. There was a bunch, probably about a dozen or so in the 90s, and every now and then one kind of pops up here and there. Warlord is trying to get off the ground again, and I'm definitely in touch with those folks.
Warlord was one of those early games I got in early to, that I like kind of figured out the mechanics and was like, oh, I'm a step ahead of everybody because I play Magic, which was a thing back in the day because not everyone who played every card game also played Magic. Now it's like, if you play a card game, you also just you play Magic.
Yeah, it's kind of and it has been so dominant in this area of gaming that every aspect of another company producing cards is compared to it. There's like it's viewed as the gold standard of how a card game should function, and
inside and out, like, but beyond just how the game plays, but also how the the back of house stuff happens as well.
yeah,
going to get cards printed, stuff like that. I used to work in the board game industry. Like, everything is like, your standard is your cards have to be at least as nice as Magic cards are. If you want to put out a game like that, you have to be able to shuffle them, that sort of stuff.
right. Yeah. But yeah, it's been great. About 5.5 years ago, I had a big transition in my career path, and I left full-time work to come back to freelancing. Sorcery was just like a little part of my freelance at that time. It was just the game wasn't out yet, and I really didn't know if it was gonna be anything. But Ars Magica has, like I said, they've taken some steps to come back, and they're releasing a new edition in the fall, or maybe early winter, I don't know, sometime soon. But that's going to have a bunch of new color art in it from me. And I'm working currently on a role-playing product that's being produced in Switzerland. This is my second project for that outfit. So I've got a couple of toes in the water, and you need to kind of diversify as a freelancer. But in the last 2 years, with Sorcery's Kickstarter release and the success that that game has had, and in finding fans like yourself who recognize that art and appreciate being to be steeped in it all over again.
Yeah.
The game has had a really, really positive effect on the community and on the people that work with it. They're really treating the artists well, and I'm just so pleased to be a part of it and so fortunate to be a part of it.
Yeah, it's so hard to explain to people sort of the nostalgia that I feel when I look at old Magic cards. Like I go back and especially if I'm playing like old school or pre-modern and stuff like that, and just like how I can play those cards and feel like I felt like when I was. It's impossible to really give people but like I can feel like where I was in life as a kid and stuff like just, and the art obviously is like a huge part of that like pulls you out of like your day-to-day working, going to the job and stuff, like all the crap that you have to deal with in life, and like just being like, oh yeah, like you just
it's kind almost of like going through a photo album or a yearbook, and for that small amount of time when you're looking at those images, it transports you back to when they imprinted themselves on your mind. There is something about the hand-painted feel of Sorcery that is achieving that same effect again.
It calls back to it heavily, yeah. So let's talk about some of your favorites. So do you have a favorite Magic piece that you worked on?
I do. It's a question that comes up frequently. So I usually throw out a 3-part answer to that question. And I could easily streamline that down to 2. There's my favorite alpha Magic piece, and that is the one I showed you earlier, the Sea Serpent.
Nice.
That was a piece that I had earmarked early on, like, oh, okay, I'm going to sell some of these paintings, I'm going to give some to friends, and I'm going to keep one for myself, and I was going to keep Sea Serpent. And what happened was, after some amount of time went by, I got a phone call that Richard Garfield at Wizards wanted to buy Sea Serpent from me for a friend of his. And I was pleased that Richard wanted one of my paintings, but also a little disappointed that he wanted one that I felt so close to. But it was Richard, so I said, sure, I'll let you buy this one. So I sold the Sea Serpent to Richard, and he gave it to a friend who was a playtester with him at Penn State or Penn University, wherever he was studying. His friend had that painting for the better part of 25 years. And at one point, when vintage play started to become a thing again, and people started having that nostalgic flair and wanted to see some of those old images again, I started to reach out to people and try and find where some of these paintings were so that maybe I could at least get a good scan. Because we didn't have scans of all the cards early on because we didn't have the technology at home. So a lot of pieces went out and got sold before I even got to capture them for my own use or posterity. So I was able to get in touch with Richard, find out who owned Sea Serpent at that time, and I reached out to him and I said, hey, I would love to borrow this piece back and get a scan of it. And he sent it back to me, and I did some repair work on the frame and fixed up the mat for him because a lot of, it was a long time. It was over 20 years that it had been sitting in that same mat. And he really appreciated that. And I said, this piece means a lot to me. If you ever decide you want to sell it, please let me know first. And I sent it back on its way. And a couple of years later, he found reasons that he needed to sell the piece for, and he wanted me to have it back. So I was able to give him a fair price for the card. He probably could have got more for it elsewhere, but I was able to reach a fair price. So we made that transaction, and now the Sea Serpent is back, living on my studio wall. But I'm not sure where we were going with that.
So Sea Serpent is one.
Yeah, my favorite alpha piece, right. But my favorite Magic painting is the Sentinel Druid.
That's right behind. You got a sketch of that behind you, huh?
I do have a sketch behind me. I have the painting too, but I didn't pull it out of the cabinet. But yeah, here's the original sketch of the Sentinel Druid.
That's awesome. Big artifact hater.
This is what's called the transfer sketch, because this is the sketch I didn't like, where I drew a little piece in my sketchbook, blew it up to the size that you see here, and then I did a drawing over my rough sketch. And this is what I would fax to Wizards of the Coast for them to see as a sketch. And when I got approval, and they said, sure, go ahead, I had to transfer that drawing onto a board. So I used what was called graphite paper. It's a lot like carbon paper. And I would have to put a piece of clean tracing paper over the top of that sketch and redraw it to push the lines through onto a piece of illustration board. And this is the transfer sketch. So I even saved all of these things. And now 95% of my sketches and transfer sketches have all separated from me by this point. But I've got those two, and I've got the sketch for Sea Serpent I showed you in the frame, and I've got here's a sketch from Ice Age. This is Timberline Ridge from Ice Age, which is just a little landscape piece with a tiny little figure, and there's a little bunny over here. I just really liked this piece. I used it as a Christmas card after Ice Age came out, and I gave that painting to my sister. So she's got that in her house. But yeah, the Sentinel Druid is just a piece that I really feel like I captured something. It's about the light behind the figure and the fact that long cast shadow of the tree lets you know that it's either the beginning of the day or the end of a day. There's no question about it. So it's something that I strive for in a lot of my work, but the shadow can tell you that it's golden hour. And that was probably the first time I caught that feeling. And I think if I did that painting today or something very close to it, I would still be satisfied with that. And the third piece that I have a real large bit of self-admiration for is the Kjeldoran Outpost.
Nice. Yeah, love it.
That's kind of like a painting that I would be excited about if I saw somebody else did it. And that was the kind of environment that I used to like to put my players in when I was a dungeon master. So I really liked the architecture in there. I liked the design of the warrior, and introducing weather as an element that could affect gameplay is something that I used to do all the time in my games, because it was something that was very hard to plan for as a player.
Yeah, fair. Yeah. I'll tell you, I'll just share with you my favorite. It's both art and in design of the card is Thawing Glaciers. Okay. That's a card that has always just resonated with me.
I still have that original.
Oh man, that's a great one.
Yeah. Yeah, that one it is a nice piece, and it practically painted itself. I remember when I did the striations of the glacier that kind of come down between the two mountains. It happened so quickly. I almost couldn't believe it, that I kind of stepped back from the painting and I was like, wow, we're almost done. The background is very on point as far as it's not overworked. It's just brushwork and really almost painted itself. But yeah, Glaciers and Outpost Alliances was a pretty strong set for me. I had 4 cards in it, and they've all aged pretty well. Glaciers and Outpost were definitely the 2 outstanding winners. Hailstorm did get reprinted a time or 2, and so did Bounty of the Hunt.
Bounty of the Hunt, yes.
So the fact that all those cards saw additional life down the line in one way or another, that was a good set for me.
So what about sorcery? What's your favorite sorcery piece?
Okay, well I've got 30 cards out in those first 2 sets, and I will have more than 40 once Gothic comes out.
Nice. Wow.
So sorcery's climbing up the list as far as games and the amount of work I've had in them. There's 54 Magic cards, and that's still the game I've contributed more art to than anything else. But sorcery's definitely climbing. Mordric Druids was a favorite of mine, and in exactly the same way that the Sea Serpent was sold, Eric Olofsson, who heads Eric's Curioso, asked if he could buy Mordred Druids for his personal collection, so I sold it to him. I kept Blizzard from the
nice.
first set for myself. It makes me think of me and my wife here in the snow. I live in Vermont.
Okay.
Up in the mountains. Yeah, that rings a little close to home. And the other, but if I had to pick a single favorite from Sorcery so far, there's a site card in Arthurian Legends called Pebbled Paths.
Oh yeah, I know Pebbled
And
Paths well. Yeah.
That painting I was really in love with, and got asked by somebody else in the company if I would let them have that.
That is one of the pitfalls with creating good art. You have to let it go eventually, you know.
It's a happy problem when people want your art. Yeah. But I mean, generally speaking, I keep about 10% of my art. So for every 10 paintings I do, I might keep one. So it doesn't sound like that much, but boy, over the years it starts to add up. And
no doubt.
That's when you find yourself letting go of a piece that somebody didn't think you'd still had anymore, or it's just the cabinet gets full and the walls are full, and you decide, maybe it's time to shed a few.
Yeah, I don't know if you saw, we did that an interview with Mark Aronowitz recently, and
I knew you did it, but I haven't seen it yet.
And he's in his like foyer or whatever, wherever he's got all the stuff, and I'm like, I have to have another interview with you so you can just go through and talk about all the art. Like, this looks sparse compared to what his entire wall, everything, so much
Mark
stuff.
has a museum space.
It's amazing, like I wish I had that much art, like I only have prints. I can't afford paintings yet, but one day I hope. But Mark's collection is just it's
outstanding.
A museum.
Yeah. Well, he's helped a lot of artists along the way. He's a great guy. Mark and I go back a long way, and he does have a piece of mine up somewhere on his wall. But yeah, I've been in that space. It's pretty awe-inspiring.
Yeah, it's pretty crazy. So I have to ask, next to you have this like sepulcher painting. What is that?
That is a new sorcery piece from the upcoming set Gothic. It was revealed just a week or two ago at Gen Con.
Nice. Okay, good. I was like, are we is this a scoop?
No,
but cool.
I wish I could give you one, but it is a second
totally
look at
okay.
it.
Yeah.
What I did want to point out, though, we were talking about size of card comparison before.
Yeah.
So this is one of my earliest card paintings, and that is one of my most recent. And they're both done for a card that is the same size in its finished product, but that's the transition that has occurred over 32 years. 32.
Wild. Well, Jeff, it's been awesome having you on, man. I really appreciate you sharing your story with us.
Sure. If there comes a point where you need more info, we could definitely do a volume 2.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much, man. I really appreciate it.
Thanks, Zach. It was really good talking to you.
Ditto. Hey, if you enjoyed this episode, hit the subscribe button.
You can also support us on patreon.com/EternalDurdles, which now offers the new Deck Donation tier. I'll play literally whatever you want.
So brew your spiciest or stock us up with a stock list.
I'll literally play whatever you want.
Thanks for watching.